Laura, hi. Thank you for joining.
Hi, thank you
Uh,
so much.
yeah, for sure. My pleasure. It's a super hectic week, so I'll start with thank you for making the time. And it's actually Dr. Laura Caroli. And before we dive into all the questions and conversations about the EUAI Act, I think it'd be great if you present yourself, obviously specifically with the in-depth, hands-on work that you've been doing around the EUAI Act. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Yoav, for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And yes, my role is I was heavily involved in the negotiations on the AI Act because for 2 full years, because I'm the advisor to Brando Benifei, who is one of the two co-rapporteurs of the AI Act, an Italian MEP. Currently running for his third term, and I've been with him for 10 years. This whole term was focused on AI governance and regulation, so it's not only 2 full years representing the parliament on his behalf at technical level, negotiating actively in the name of the parliament in front of council and under the supervision of the commission, but also, all the preparatory work that came before that. Because of course we didn't just wake up one day and started drafting amendments on the AI Act.
Amazing. So if
So
anybody knows anything about the EUAI Act and the intricacies of it in the small print, that would be you, among others, which is amazing. And maybe a few words about yourself, just personally and professionally, of how you got to do that and what you've been doing in the last few years leading to this position.
Of course. So as I mentioned, I've been 10 years now in Parliament. Prior to that, I was working in Italian think tanks, Italian Parliament as well. My PhD is unrelated to AI, I have to say, but it's on geopolitics. And we do see a major connection there right now with AI. So I don't think I'm completely out of place in it. And of course, with the work of my MEP, I've been working a lot on apart from foreign affairs and defense in the past term, also on digital affairs, and in particular this whole term where we also worked on the special committee on AI that was launched at the beginning of the term, and last like 1.5 years we did the final report. We negotiated the final report, so it's a massive piece of uh, a collection of proposals and considerations that the parliament made at that time, just before delving into the complexities of the AI Act. So I've been immersed in this for quite some time now myself.
Yeah, I'd add from my understanding of the situation that I think geopolitics definitely fits in the push and pull that's going globally in the arms race of development, deployment, regulation, standardization. I think it's there. I think you felt it hands-on in the deliberations around the EUAI Act. I feel it in many forums that I'm in. If it's the OECD AI, the push and pull between NIST and the US, the sense on like a EU, the ISO IC international layer, what's SEC are doing in Canada. So a lot of geopolitics going on there, which we can maybe
Oh yeah.
revisit later in the conversation. And I think we'll just jump right into it with the EU Act itself. There's a lot of voices around the EU Act ever since it's been finalized, and obviously leading to that point, a lot of voices are negative, some of them are positive. It's hard to balance the equation because from my personal experience, a lot of the people that I hear talking about it are people who are not that involved, who have not maybe read the full final version of it, again, not being aware of the little intricacies behind the scenes and how difficult it was to create such a landmark document and legislation. And I think you can help us, first of all, myself, but also everybody listening, to better understand the negative, the positive. And also, I'll mention this is one of the reasons that I've decided of recording these sessions with professionals that I have the privilege of working with and discuss with along the way, because a lot of the times I feel that people are making an opinion, but it's not an informed opinion. They haven't gone through the due diligence of really checking the facts of what they're talking about. So I think this is a great opportunity hearing directly from you about it. So with that, you can maybe do a little bit of an intro to why it was decided to go with that framework the way it was, the way it is at the moment, and later on we could talk about different maybe landmark points in time in the implementation of it.
Sure. Yes, exactly. Thank you. Indeed, there has been a lot of talk. Of course, now the AI Act is out there for the world to look at, to read, and it's fair enough that it's been criticized from every possible point of view, and then it's just fair that it is happening right now. But I would like to maybe stress a few points to highlight to me the negative aspects that are normally in the criticism we read and we hear from commentators, all going in from, of course, the very basic, as you said, innovators just saying, you're killing innovation, blah blah blah. I would just disregard this, because this is not, it's not serious from my point of view to say that without knowing that it is not just, we are not just imposing regulation and full stop, not doing anything else on top of it. Of course, this law comes with policies, investment policies. Of course, we have problems in Europe, but we are not just binding ourselves to something just because we want to hurt ourselves. And that's really not the point. And actually, the AI Act per se contains a lot also of elements to try to stimulate innovation. By the way, responding to legal obstacles and constraints to some of us actually stimulates innovation, because it creates a business model on its own, to have products that are compliant. So first of all, yes, I already said the magic words, products that are compliant. So the AI Act, the framework, the legal framework that was chosen in the first place, like how do we even approach AI regulation? It's not that simple, when you have to start from scratch. So the Commission in April 2021, when they put forward the proposal, they went with this product safety framework that is very, technical. It's just high-level requirements for products that circulate in the EU market, and with a rather more or less flexible structure, because it's heavily reliant on standards. So industry-led standards as to how to operationalize those high-level requirements in practice, and then a lot is left to self-assessment for the companies to do their own due diligence, put this famous CE marking on the product, in this case AI, and then release it on the EU market.
And with that, you mean the different levels? Sorry to interrupt. With that, you mean the different levels of commitment of a company with their products to the distinction, whether it's high risk or low risk, or is it different distinction with the commitment of self-assessment? Because we're talking about the standardization presumption of conformity relative to only high-risk systems, right?
Of course. You just have to do a very first high-level assessment, like, am I in the scope or not of the AI Act? So the first thing now that companies have to do is to think, am I in the scope of the AI Act or not? A lot of them, from high-level conversations that we've had throughout the months, and even more recently, they don't have it super clear whether or not they fit into the AI Act or not. So they just think we are regulating everything, everybody. But the beauty of the AI Act is, of course, it is a risk-based approach regulation. So only a subset of AI systems will be regulated, and only a subset of actors in the value chain will have responsibilities, according to the risk level. For example, if you only have to comply with the transparency requirements because you are just developing a chatbot, then whoever is using the chatbot, the only thing they have to do. So if you are a provider of a chatbot, you only have to make it so the deployer of that chatbot can currently say you are interacting the AI system.
Yeah.
As simple as that. So the
Yes.
system has to be equipped, and then the deployer has to do it visibly. That's the only thing they have to do. Whereas, of course, if you are developing a system to use in the migration context, of course, you have more responsibilities as a provider, and the deployer as well, of course, because deployers will have to do also a whole lot of due diligence actions. And I mean, they will have to have a adequate human oversight, adequate competence, monitor the system, cooperate with authorities, inform. I mean, maybe not in the migration context because the member states do not like that much,
Yes.
But that's a political discussion. I don't know if we want to have it right now. So of course,
But maybe, I
come back.
I totally agree. I think it's a great example that you're giving. I think a next step moving forward with your example would be the intricacies of vertical. I mean, the one challenge that I see with standardization, it being with the attempt of making it harmonized, be it in the international layer or the national with Sensenelec, would be a vertical-based adaptation of the harmonized standards, meaning taking it to your specific example, the chatbot would need to be differently regulated, I guess. I'm asking you, the expert. Would need to be differently regulated if we're talking about a chatbot that's helping in some kind of a mental situation, if it's a kind of mental health chatbot, or if it's something which is maybe more customer service for an airline, with the and there's some responsibilities there with the very famous example from the last few months with Air Canada, I think, with the court making them live up to the promises of their chatbot, creating some kind of a compensation plan that doesn't really exist, which they didn't want to respect, but the court made them. So with that small example, maybe we can highlight the differences, if there are any, relative to the UAI Act.
Well, I'm reflecting as we speak. They would just need to transparently say that you're interacting with an AI system. That's all it's needed to do. Of course, one can argue then, can that specific system be considered as one of the high-risk use cases falling within the healthcare sector? But I'm not sure this would qualify as a medical device. It wouldn't. So
okay.
You know what?
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a different example.
Sure.
So one of the other files I worked on in this mandate, just a few months ago, we closed the negotiations in parallel with the AI Act, was the toy safety regulation,
Okay.
which will update the rules on toy safety that are there already in place with a directive that needed to be revised. Connected toys containing AI, because of the impact they can have on mental health, for example, of children, etc. And one of the problems we found in that regulation, and we tried to intervene, but we didn't succeed, I have to say, was to make sure that the new regulation would be covered by the AI Act, because as it is one of the harmonized products, the realm of toys is one of the pieces of legislation listed in the first annex. Now it's Annex 1 of the AI Act. So the point is, when does a harmonized product become an AI system that is considered high risk? And it's not in all cases. It is under two precise circumstances in Article 6, Paragraph 1. So per the AI Act, an AI system that is embedded in a harmonized product, so in this case a toy, would be considered in the scope of the AI Act only under two conditions. The first one is that the AI system itself is a safety component or is itself the product. So it would be the case of a toy having an AI system to prevent it from causing harm to the child, or an AI system that is a toy. I didn't manage to find an example. Nobody managed so far, because they are not so frequent. They are very rare cases. And on top of that, the second condition is that that product so in this case the toy, is required under its respective legislation to undergo a third-party conformity assessment. So since the toy safety regulation doesn't have a mandatory third-party conformity assessment for a specific category of toys, even though some advocated, some us included, advocated for toys under 36 months to have a third-party conformity assessment, it's in large part left to self-assessment through standards, as we said before, as with all the other harmonized products. So in our interpretation, and actually the legal service of the parliament agreed with me in this interpretation, virtually no toy will ever be included in the scope of the AI Act because these two conditions will be very rarely met. So what happens, for example, I always make this example of with a doll that has a chatbot embedded in it. It would not be covered by the AI Act because it would not be considered as a safety component, and the toy itself would not undergo a third-party conformity assessment. So none of the two conditions would be, met. And so what happens when the chatbot goes rogue and starts to incite the child to put the fingers in a plug or jump out of the window, or to stop eating because they get fat, or there are a whole lot of issues.
A whole lot of concerns that we can think about, and a whole lot of other concerns that we can't. I just read a post by, who was it? Gary Marcus, I think, about the fact that hallucinations are not only the biases that we put into the models through data, they're just completely new hallucinations, if it's okay to use that term, that we didn't even expect.
I think we read the same post.
Amazing.
Because I also thought of that. Yeah.
So I completely agree, and I think you're just breaking into kind of my next question or follow-up question to what you're describing. And sorry to interrupt. With, let's even go to the extent of pouring on top of all that complexity Gen AI. So let's say that what you call a chatbot, I call an implementation of one of the models that we already know are biased, right? I've read multiple research lately, different papers that talk about biases, even simple ones between men and women, that are eminent in ChatGPT, for example, just to give a concrete example, but there are many others. So again, how would that, let's say, quote unquote chatbot be treated when it's embedded in a toy or in anything else? Let's continue with the toy example that you just gave.
Yeah, no, so basically, no, meaning that even like a chatbot under the AI Act is not considered per se, even if it can have harmful effects, there is not much else that we regulate in it, And the same like with deepfakes, like one wonders now with the whole concern about democracy in this big election year that we are facing right now, not only in Europe, but in the whole world and in US included. For example, if you converse right now on AI with US elected officials, staffers, whatever, we've been doing that throughout the months. Of course, we have a kind of a constant dialogue with them. They're very interested in what we do and in making it interoperational with what they are doing, of course, on their side, is, the whole concept of using deepfakes to skew elections, to influence voters and put their disinformation to a level that was unimaginable just a few years ago with social media.
I agree.
The point is, when I hear this concern, of course, then I wonder, did we do enough on this? Because they are super mega concerned about deepfakes. And actually, in the AI Act, we just want transparency measures on them. Apart from, of course, you can attach to this the whole chapter on general purpose AI models. So at the level of the model, we do introduce transparency requirements for all general purpose AI models. But if you really take a look at the information we request, is basically mostly elements that are already present in current model cards. It's not rocket science or something completely, the world that we are asking, except maybe for the copyright part. and only for the very powerful models, like the models that we consider as posing a systemic risk, then we include some more beef to it, like with cybersecurity measures, evaluation, risk mitigation, adversarial testing, and what have you. And also energy efficiency, because that was also a very important addition that we insisted on as Parliament. So I actually would like to get back a bit to this narrative, if we can, because I got lost in many details.
Sure.
A lot of, the narrative that is right now everywhere, apart from the, you're killing innovation, whatever, is product safety as a framework doesn't work. Maybe I can identify two major reasons why. Like some of the people who advocate for this kind of argument are mainly civil society organizations that say that by using product safety to regulate something that deals so profoundly with fundamental rights is wrong as a concept per se. And it will only, it's a contradiction, and it disregards the value of fundamental rights. So the framework should have been different, maybe, or similar to GDPR or ethical frameworks. Okay, so that's one criticism. The second criticism is even stranger to my ears, because they say, how can you regulate with a static set of requirements something that changes and adapts so quickly? Of course, I will respond to both of these criticisms in their respective flaws, in my opinion. So the first one that says product safety is not the right framework because of fundamental rights, I do agree in part. It's not that I disagree. The point is that the AI Act in its final form is not anymore pure product safety, because of the work we did. Now there are a lot of articles that deal with fundamental rights, obligations that even final deployers of AI systems that are high risk need to perform, like for example, the fundamental rights impact assessment that is not present in any other product safety legislation. At the same time, we have introduced remedies and rights, such as the right to receive a meaningful explanation that is complementary to the one that is already in the GDPR. So normally in product safety legislation, we never have remedies because they are provided for in normal in the regular framework of consumer protection rules. So I think the final version of the AI Act is a testament to the fact that we do appreciate that this is not a simple product. Like AI is not a washing machine. So of course we don't regulate it as such. And then, so this is the first response. Like now the AI Act is a hybrid piece of legislation. And I will get back to this when we talk about enforcement, because that's also important as we talk about the next steps, The second argument that the product safety framework is too static. Well, first of all, how can we ever regulate something that changes so fast there is basically no way to do it, because otherwise, if you want to regulate something that changes so fast by adapting all the time the rules, how do you have legal certainty? You don't. And also democratic process that is supposed to happen when you put forward legislation and approve legislation. Then the AI Act is actually not as rigid as it seems, and static as it seems. It can actually prove to be a bit more future-proof than we give it credit for, I think. Because first of all, again, it relies a lot on standards. So These standards, of course, they will be stabilized at some point, but I mean, it's up to the industry mainly to see what fits best to internal practices that are concretely feasible for companies. So we have to put our trust in them to know how to address this challenge. Of course, it was a challenge for everybody. It is always a collective effort to regulate such a complex topic. So first of all, standards, and then a lot will be left to not only secondary legislation, like delegated acts, implementing acts. The code of practice itself on general purpose AI model can be considered more or less similar to a standard. So it will have a self-regulatory approach, more or less. Let's say co-regulatory, because the companies will have to have a dialogue with the Commission in order to stabilize the practices. And also there will be like tons of guidelines. Guidelines, of course, can be adapted. And so I really don't see this extremely negative narrative about it being useless and not future-proof at all as being valid. I mean, we will see, of course. And the AI Act has other problems, in my opinion. I don't think that I only see positives. But when it comes, for example, to enforcement, another positive element that it will have is that it is constantly compared to the GDPR. Of course, I understand why, but it's profoundly different also because of the enforcement structure. Even the very concept of it, like whereas the GDPR is focused.
So you know what? Maybe I'll be a bit of a rude interviewer. I'll stop you here for just a second because there's so many. There's no, that's fine. It's a topic that you live and breathe, so it's just flowing out of you, just like water from a river or a fountain, which is amazing. Which is the reason we're recording this conversation, so that people can have a more opinionated discussion and make up their minds, knowing the actual details and intricacies. So that's amazing. You're doing great. I just want to take a breather to try and, we've been talking quite a lot about many different intricate processes. So let's try and break it down and take a step back for a second before breaking it down. So I think the reason I love this conversation is because you as a professional bring some kind of a truthfulness to the conversation, just like Kai Zenner did, and any other of my interviewees, about saying, things are not perfect. The reason that I was involved with the UI Act doesn't mean that I'm shielding it and saying no criticism and it's perfect. You're not doing that. You're looking at things at eye level, saying it's not perfect. You're even articulating where you think it needs to be improved. And I think you gave a really good response in a structured way, talking about 2 bullet points of criticism and your opinion, which I couldn't agree more. And I'd like to unpack that in just a second. I'll just say that I think I said the same thing a few conversations ago. We're saying it's not perfect, but we're having an educated discussion, right, on what needs improvement. So that's good. I want to specifically articulate something around the innovation around product, which I think was very much needed. And I want to strengthen you in pushing back on the criticism of this not needing a product perspective. I'd argue against what those companies or civil society organizations are saying, because when you break it down and you say you need an ethical framework, well, I've seen ethical frameworks for AI ever since 2017. I won't name the name of the companies because that's not the purpose of the discussion, but who's who, the leader of the industry have been issuing out each one to each his own. There's no unifications, there's no specific collaboration. Everybody does what they want and say we have an ethical guideline. And what does that mean when I come and meet the engineers? Not much. And I'm not saying they're not doing anything, and I'm not saying they're not well-intentioned. I'm just saying that it's not how we build regulation, and that's not how we level the playing field for an industry, let alone globally. So adding to that, I'd say that if you're looking at things through the lens of standardization and conformity assessment, then one of the key missing aspects is the product. And I'll give an example to what I mean. When you're talking about one of the leading deliverables now out of the committee that I'm part of, which is SC42, and the AIMS document, right, the AM management system, it's a good document, it's a good deliverable, but it's still very challenging. It's not perfect. And why is that? Because first of all, when you're building an auditing process on top of it, you're basically auditing the company and not the product. So you're not necessarily promising any safety from a product perspective, which again, we have to have, right? So that would be a first. And the second one is that that specific document still doesn't have enough common guardrails that are a must-have for everybody. And at the moment, each player can basically interpret the document according to their best understanding. And I see that as a problem. And I think that's exactly the correction that the EU AI Act can bring, again, from the legislation through presumption of conformity, again, to standardization, improve upon. So building on everything we've done internationally, but taking it a step further, making it more coherent, more concrete. And coming back to your specific discussion and answer to those organizations about, safety. So what does that mean? So just like Sebastian says, it's the legislation place to say we need safety, and then standards would come in and say, what does that mean practically? How do we do a product in a safer way when we're talking about AI? So I couldn't agree more. And so I wanted to strengthen you with a bit more enrichment from the standardization perspective that I bring in. And through the static response that you gave, I also fully agree. And you talked about a whole lot of different mechanisms there that I'd like to unpack if you're willing. And so you mentioned standards. We've already spoken about a little bit. You talked about a secondary legislation, code of practice. There's the AI office. So again, a lot to unpack. And maybe before we reach to the enforcement structure, you can talk a little bit more about the code of practice, the AI office, whatever you want, to give a fuller understanding to the audience on why you don't think it's so static, which again, I agree with. But again, a lot of people don't understand why you're saying that and what's behind those mechanisms.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for just digressing. It's unbelievable how many things you want to say about AI.
Yeah, there's so much to say. Sure.
Yeah. So indeed, again, the key concept here is the key to the process we will have on implementing the AI Act. It will remain a collective effort, and it has to be so. Otherwise, it would be a failure from the very beginning. I mean, it will not just be a top-down approach, because okay, you have now the AI office that is already established. It's already working like 24/7 on the implementation phase, and then member states are currently also working to appoint their own national authorities. By the way, it would be very likely even more than one authority per member state, depending on how they organize themselves. So even that is already complicated enough. But at the same time, we will have for example, this scientific panel of independent experts that will be appointed, and that would be very helpful to trigger, for example, alerts on specific, systemic risks about specific models that emerge on the market during the implementation phase. And we will have the advisory forum that will be closely involved with the AI office. For example, also not only in normal conversations, consultations on the guidelines, normal dialogue, multi-stakeholder dialogue, but also, for example, we insisted on the fact that they would have a real say in the interventions that the Commission would take on common specifications that are there to complement the standards, in particular from a perspective where there is a specific problem on fundamental rights, because then we could also unpack the whole problem of standardizing fundamental rights, how contradictory it is even as a concept. And this is also one of the things we will see later if it works or not. But anyway, so this advisory forum, the beauty of it is that we want it to be really representative of society as a whole, not unlike a big standardization where standardization bodies are known to be mostly industry-led for obvious various reasons, and civil society, for example, is only represented as more or less a minority. And also SMEs have a problem there in terms of resources or problems with participating in the standardization process. So what did we advocate for and obtain in the final version of the AI Act is that this advisory forum that would be established would serve as a balanced platform representing equally civil society on one side and industry on the other, and within industry we provide a balanced representation of SMEs and bigger companies, which is a bit trying to rebalance what happens normally in the standardization process. And
amazing.
course,
so that's the entire process around the advisory forum. Oh, sorry, there was a lag there in the conversation. Sorry.
Yes.
Please continue. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, and at the same time, we were also asked, like also by individual stakeholders that are still reaching out to us, like, can we participate, for example, in the elaboration of the codes of practice? It's something that we wrote very late in the negotiation process, but it is written clearly in the article on this, that stakeholders will be involved in the elaboration of codes of practice. There is no mention of a specific framework, but they will be, and even in the recitals it is mentioned. So it's only logical for us that they are, and I hope the AI office will take this not lightly but very seriously into account, because it's too important not to do it. So we will monitor what they're doing, because now the ball is in their court, right? In the AI office court, in drafting a first attempt at these codes of practice. But in order for them to be successful, then not only stakeholders but companies themselves that will have to apply them will need to be heavily involved.
Amazing. So these are all basically different checks and balances mechanisms that are all intertwined. So we have the advisory forum you talked about, we have the code of practice you talked about, and we have the entire AI office envelope of an actual physical structure with people working in it beyond just dealing with code of practice. So I think it's a great opportunity to maybe say a few words about the AI office, just so people have a grasp of what that means.
Sure. Yes, of course. It was actually requested by the Parliament itself. We initially wanted an external body, not an agency per se, but an independent body that would be able to, ensure a uniform implementation of this regulation. Then in the final form in the AI Act, it would be a branch of the Commission, basically. So it would be within the Commission, so that, by the way, it has already been established already at the end of January, and it's already operational. Currently in the process of hiring a lot of technical experts to accomplish all of the tasks that we gave it, that have been counted as robots so far in ensuring the implementation of the AI Act from day one.
That's a lot of work.
So
okay, just to give it
they
balancing.
basically hate us. Sorry, guys.
Love-hate relationship. You made them, you brought them to life, and they hate you.
Yes. No, but basically the beauty of it is that by being within the Commission, not only they have accountability towards the Parliament and they have more executive tools, let's say, but they can also pool resources with all the other structures that have been created in the meantime for, DSA, DMA, and because we have a lot of legislation to coordinate together with,
The Digital Services Act, you mean, yeah.
Yeah, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, that have, their own task forces established. For example, there are overlaps with the Digital Services Act regarding the risk management system of very large online platforms. For example, very large online platforms, in some cases, they can have some overlaps with the future requirements of general purpose AI models. Think about Meta as models. For example,
of course.
Google.
Yeah.
So even the concept of systemic risk was taken partly from the Digital Services Act, of course, readapting it, because in that case you can use more of a competition angle, and also more targeted to the nature itself of social media. Whereas with the AI Act, you need to stay very general. Like, even what is a systemic risk in the case of AI is still not completely packed as we speak. I remember conversations when we had to define it. It was a bit of a conundrum. Now, of course, we talk about vulnerabilities that, if replicated at the scale of very powerful model that can be replicated into millions of AI systems along the value chain, then can be really disruptive for the whole market, because they can incorporate those vulnerabilities down in the value chain.
So that is indeed a challenge, and trying to link it to what we discussed just a second ago with the different mechanisms. So who would be in charge at the moment of dealing with that task of articulating better? Would it be standardization through JTC 21, or would it be the advisory forum and the code of practice through the AI office? Who do you expect to take that forward and bring a more clear image at this time stamp, along the timeline? I'm sure that in 6 months' time it would be a different answer, and that's the whole it not being static and being alive and in discussion with the market. But who's leading that?
Yeah. Well, actually, the issue of general purpose AI models and everything that revolves around them is enforced by the AI office. So that was identified as the main task that the AI office would be assigned to, basically, because that would require the most centralized way of enforcing the rules. Because imagine 27 different national authorities having to evaluate those very big models, and the risk of fragmentation that there can. Whereas with the AI office itself, it's a whole new area of expertise that is needed, and the fact that it's concentrated into one structure has the benefit of ensuring really uniform, centralized enforcement, which is very, very important if we don't want to fragment the market.
So the AI office will have that continuous discussion. Again, it not being static, and it also touches on the enforcement part that you wanted to talk a little bit more about, which is also delegated to the AI office partly.
Partly, yes, but that's the problem. Like, one of the problems I see with the AI Act is this separation between the models and the systems. I mean, because the models will be mostly regulated centrally, like as we just said, of course, in cooperation with the member states, because they will never accept to be completely excluded from the process, and always in cooperation with stakeholders, standardization bodies. I mean, the dialogue will still be there in various forms. But at the same time, when it comes to high-risk AI systems, who will check every day whether a system is compliant or not will be the national authorities. And so I see a problem, but also in this a positive element compared to the GDPR, because the concept itself of the GDPR, of the enforcement taking place where the data processing has occurred, so mainly where the company is established, creates bottlenecks when in the cases that, we very well know in member states where there is a high concentration of such companies. Like we know the case of Ireland, not being able to enforce properly because there is a real bottom there because all the companies are there. Whereas with the AI Act, being it product safety legislation, the enforcement structure will be largely the same one as the market surveillance for all products, which is a very well-established structure that ensures also quite high coordination among member states, which is actually great, because when we have cross-border cases, it would be super important, or lack of resources in a member state that can be compensated, by this cooperation. It would be super important on the ground. And the enforcement happens where the product circulates, so not where the company is established, but I mean where it physically is right now, where the infringement took place, like where it is non-compliant, it is manifestly discovered as non-compliant, like through a check by a market surveillance authority. So it could be anywhere in Europe, because a market surveillance authority suddenly sees, oh, that AI system the police is using is actually not compliant. It was, I don't know, there is a CE marking, but it's only a fake one, like we see happening with harmonized products every day. You can just declare that your product is compliant and put the CE marking, pretending that everything is going well, but then when you check in practice the requirements, they don't correspond, or maybe the documentation isn't there. The same will happen with AIC. It will be more distributed.
Yeah, it sounds like a good product perspective. So thank you for highlighting more on that. And I think that gives a lot of material to anybody who was not well informed on the topic to think about and process and better understand the AI Act. And next time they approach it, either through reading the articles, which are sometimes read separately in a siloed manner, and then it misses the entire picture, which is what we were trying to bring in this conversation, a more cohesive, holistic understanding of the process, let alone just understanding a specific article, which I hope we managed to do. And maybe on a finishing note, it's not something specific to the work you're doing because you're so focused on your original work with the legislation, but I'm wondering from your vantage point, which is again very well informed and very unique with hands-on understanding, if you're seeing or hearing anything on the topic that we started from of the geopolitics around AI legislation. Are you seeing any ripple effects already in different countries? I don't know, or maybe lower down into the member states themselves in the challenger. So you can talk a little bit about that if you want.
Oh yeah, that's super interesting actually, what is happening right now on AI. I mean, there is growing and growing, not only activity, like non-stop activity on AI governance frameworks that are being suggested or worked upon. We have already several frameworks forming, like we have the Council of Europe Convention, that was a bit of a bummer, but still it's something because it doesn't really address the private sector. But anyway, we cannot all expect everyone to regulate exactly the same way as Europe on AI. There is the Hiroshima process that is actually, evolving, by putting more details into these codes of practice that actually at some point could really be close, if not coincide with what will be the codes of practice of the AI Act for general purpose AI models to some extent. There is the UN work, the OECD one. Of course, we are in constant dialogue with the US. I mean, one thing that I really found amazing was the other day, I read about this news about the Colorado law, the state of Colorado, on taking the risk-based approach, of course, like everybody else is doing, like us. But in really outlining, the details, they basically copy-pasted Article 6 of the AI Act, like the four conditions that indicate whether your system can be considered as not being high risk, even if it is used in one of the high-risk areas. These conditions are actually exactly replicated in that law, and that shows how, we are not imposing something that is really out of the world. And even, in the new 2024 AI index by Stanford, we do see that even in the US, the concerns about AI are actually increasing, maybe also for the reasons I talked about before, like with the deepfakes, disinformation, etc. So there is a whole plethora of legislative initiatives at state level that at some point will need to converging to something. It would be interesting to see if and when. I mean, we are in touch with Congress and Senate staffers who really want to do something about it. Of course, with the polarization they have there, it's not that straightforward. So I don't know how long it would take and if it will ever come out to something. But I mean, the intention is there for some. So there is a huge, indeed, international multilateral aspect and also geopolitical one, because of course now the blocs are kind of also exerting their influence, not only on regulation, but also on standardization. I mean, I don't need to tell you who are more involved than me in standardization, the activism of China at the beginning and how left behind we were, not understanding fully the implications that assertiveness could have in the future. And now apparently is a bit better. But again, this I will leave to you because you know more than me there. But indeed, the geopolitical dimension is crucial and it's becoming more and more evident.
I see it too. I was wondering, what you managed to experience so far. I'm actually visiting this topic hands-on also through OECD AI from a geopolitical perspective. I'm working on the AI index. I'm working on AI risk in the expert group there. I was privileged to invite to contribute, and I'm happy to because I think it connects all the work that I'm doing through standardization and legislation locally and internationally to a more cohesive understanding of what do we want to achieve globally. And again, leveling the playing field and creating easier trade and less of a competition between nations on who's first on AI regulation, but more of what you just said, of taking the best from each other and reaching some consensus on how do we regulate the technology.
Exactly, and the beauty of it, I think, is that we have a lot of common goals there and common ideas that are forming.
Exactly.
So we are not that far apart.
Yes. By the way, I think for a finishing note on my side, I've been saying that for the last year, and I get really annoyed anytime anybody says, the EU with the harmonized approach and the US with the vertical approach are basically competing to see who has the better system or which system wins. And I think it's such a redundant argument because at the end of the day, when you're looking at it from a practical perspective, the US and the EU would both need to, let's say, flush down or adapt or somehow craft better adaptations for specific verticals. Because when you're implementing AI in finance and when you're implementing it in health and other topics and obviously in education, you need different adaptations of actual deliverables. So when you're talking about management systems and risk management processes and impact assessments, so they all look a little bit different for each vertical. And so it doesn't matter if you start from a harmonized approach or a vertical approach. At the end of the day, they both meet in the middle. That is my approach. So I'm less focused on the geopolitical tensions and more about how do we reach the consensus through shared work.
Yeah.
And connecting it to your work, I think the EU, again, is a landmark document, landmark achievement. And even though it's not perfect, when nothing is, I think it pushed everybody in the right direction to start the conversation and the collaboration around it. So it's a real cornerstone of legislation that we can work from and again, make the adaptations and changes and improve together.
Exactly.
Amazing. So with that, Laura, thank you so much. Really, I know how hectic it is. Every time we try to schedule, you were in another meeting, finalizing, making small changes, corrections, additions. So I really appreciate you taking the time to better explain and give a better understanding of the work that you've been involved in. And I wish you a great week and a great day.
Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. By the way, just let me conclude by saying one thing, that today in just a few hours, the 24-hour period to request a vote on the corrigendum will be over.
Amazing.
So the work of the parliament will be done. Now just a formal approval by the council and official journal.
Amazing. So congratulations on all the work and the achievements. And thank you again.